they gave it to Bugner, so that was it. I said, right, I'll retire.
Well, let me take you back to 1963 and the first fight against Cassius Clay at Wembley Stadium.
Yep.
Was that the most perfect left hook?
Well, I think it was one of them. I've thrown about, I suppose, 5 great left hooks in my career, and that was definitely one of the great ones. When you throw a left hook, and it's, you play golf now, Dick, when you get that one out the sweet spot and it goes 250, when I hit him with this left hook here, I knew he was in trouble. Eyes tell you everything in boxing, and I knew his eyes had gone. If you look at where I hit him, I hit him too close to the ropes, and the ropes let him down gently from the top, middle to the bottom. Now, if I'd have knocked him perhaps down in the centre of the ring, and he'd have gone down and hit his head and shook his head. And Angelo Dundee, I must say, I've had dinner with him on a couple of occasions since then, he always says that he was in trouble. And you can see there where they break the file under his nose, which was strictly illegal in them days. And then you can see this is pointing the split glove, which no one saw in the previous round. So it must have been, and Angelo Dundee openly admitted to me that when he came back to ring, he said, I had less than 50 seconds to recover him. He said, and I knew I wasn't going to recover him, so I had to do something to get time for him to recover.
In fact, that interval lasted well over 2 minutes, didn't it?
Oh, 2.5 minutes. See, because in them days, they didn't have second sets of gloves at ringside. From that fight onwards, they have second sets of gloves under the ring now. So what the referee did, he went to the steward in charge who sat at ringside. Steward in charge had to send someone back to the chief whip in the dressing room, get another set of gloves. By the time he got back, he had a 2.5 minute interval. Now, to a fit guy, that's a lifetime.
So it was a badly cut eye, a very bad one too.
Oh, yeah.
And then 3 years later, the same ending. But of course, he was a much shrewder fighter by this time, much more experienced, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. See, in the first fight in '63, I messed Ali about inside. He was quite amateurish at inside fighting in them days, and I messed him out. I had his nose bleeding in the first round. But the second fight, he'd been well schooled and he'd well learned, because directly I got into any sort of a clinch with him, it was whop. It was just like being in a vice. He had the longest reach in boxing, and his arms wrapped around you like an octopus, and I couldn't move. And he was just waiting for the referee to say break, and as he said break, he pushed me back and jumped back himself. Oh, he'd well learned. Yeah.
2 bad cut eyes. They were always a problem. Why were your eyes so vulnerable, Henry?
Well, basically because, we've got the typical sort of white man's skull, prominent cheekbone and eyebrow. See, and they would see, and we've got very sharp bone. Now, brother George, bless his heart, he suffered from cuts worse than I did. He boxed as a pro for 9 or 10 years, but he had some terrible worse cuts than I ever had, And the doctor said to him, you only had to tap him on the eye, and the skin would cut because the bone was sharp, would come through. And same with me, I had similar trouble. But it's just a physical thing, how you're made.
You mentioned George, who was boxing as Jim, but
Brother
where
Jim.
did your love of boxing, how did it start?
Well, it was in family, Dad's side of the family. Dad did a bit of boxing. He was a boy soldier in the First World War sort of thing, and he did a bit of boxing, and he went into 1 or 2 competitions at the old National Sporting Club. But Grandad, his father was an old bare-knuckle fighter, so I never knew Grandad because he was dead years before we were born. Now, the Cooper family came from the Elephant Castle in them days, which was a tough old area in them days. Tough now, not so good now, but it was tougher in them days. And they used to have an horse depository there where all the Diddickis and Jibbos and farmers used to come up from Kent to buy and sell horses. Well, Grandad, being Irish, he knew a bit about horses, and he used to earn a few bob there, like running his hands over, looking at their teeth. No, don't buy it, or yes, it's a good buy it. And I used to tip him, and Dad used to say, we used to eat well sometimes. Grandad used to come in where he'd been a bare knuckle fighter, and he smashed his hands up bad in the winter. He couldn't put his hand. He'd say to my dad, "Son, put your hand in there," and Dad used to put his hand, pull it out, and sometimes he'd find half a sovereign. Now he said, "Blowy, we knew we were going to eat well that week."
So you'd got that love of boxing, but how did you foster it? Was it the Bellingham Boxing Club?
Yeah, the old Bellingham Amateur Boxing. Now we had a great trainer there, Matt Wells, who was British lightweight champion. Now, dear old Matt, he had the best 2 cauliflower ears you've ever seen, and yet, see, people who don't know boxing, they'd look at Matt and say, God, look at him, he must have took a belt in his, and he didn't. He was only clever boxers got cauliflower ears.
Why's that?
Well, see, because if you remember the old days, the laces were exposed on the inside of the glove. Now, clever fighters, when they see a punch coming, they go like that, and it was a rubbing movement with the lace on the ear. You'd never get a cauliflower with a direct punch. It's a rubbing, like rugby players, when they go down, it's a rubbing. And that, you only see cauliflower ears with rugby players. They're boxers, and they're not too clever, but...
But you had a very successful amateur career, didn't you? I mean, two ABA titles?
Yeah, I won the ABAs in 52 and 53, once in Civvy Street and then once through the Army. I won that in the Army in 53.
Well, what was it that convinced you that you really couldn't make it in the professional ranks?
Well, I'd been to Olympic Games, I'd been to European Championships. I didn't do particularly well in any of those big competitions, but I'd fought all top-class amateur. I mean, I beat Tony Madigan, who was an Australian Olympic champion. He won the Golden Gloves Championships in America, and I give him a boxing lesson and beat him in the ABAs in 1953. So, I was good enough to say, well, let's turn pro. And see, because in them days, amateurs, we used to get top in the bill. Like in them days, we get a canteen of cutlery, or we get a coffee percolator, and well, I thought I owned a jeweller's shop at home because I must have had like 20 or 30 canteens of cutlery and coffee percolator, and we were selling them for about £3 a piece. I thought, we might as well earn some money and make it pay, like turn pro.
Well, the man that guided you through your professional career was Jim Wicks, or the Bishop, or Seamus, as you called
dear
him.
old Jim.
How did you two get together?
Well, there used to be a great old pressman years ago. His name was J.T. Oles, not Sidney Oles. It was J.T. Oles. He used to write in the evening news all about amateur boxing. Him and dear old Wally Boltman used to go around together, and they covered all the amateur shows in London. And he used to live in South East London, J.T. Oles, and he always said to me, he said, son, he said, if ever you think of turning pro, there's only one man to go with, and that's Jim Wicks. And that was the best advice I'd ever... If anyone says to me, what was the best advice you ever had in your life, and that was to go to Jim, as asking him to be my manager, and which we did.
Because most managers buy the people they want, as they pay them money to come and join them. But
Jim Wicks would never bought a fighter in his life.
Why is that?
He always said if a manager buys a fight, well, the only thing he's going to concentrate on is to get his money back. And Jim Wicks would never do that. Jim Wicks, he was a lovely character. See, Jim Wicks basically, for my first 10 fights, he never stopped his commission. He never stopped his 25% commission, which he was entitled to. Me, Jim, all these boxers, until we were earning hundreds of pounds, he wouldn't take his commission. But now, if he'd have bought us, if he'd have paid like 5 or 10 grand to buy us, he'd have been like most managers. They want to cop their 25% to get their money back. They're thinking that way.
Now you started very well. I think you won your first 9 fights, didn't you?
Yeah, at the old Aaron Gay Arena.
Then you followed that with a dicey period, didn't you?
Yeah, I had 3 fights. I can't think what. I think it was like Ingemar Johansson, I think I lost to. Then it was Joe Bygraves.
For the British title?
For the British title. And then I lost to Erskine.
In an eliminator?
In an eliminator for the British title. And see, I couldn't make out what was going wrong because, see, if I'd have been playing around, hadn't been training properly, playing around, I could have understood it. But, I mean, I was conscientious, I was young, I was in the gym every day, working hard, sparring, but nothing would go right. So Jim... He said to me, because Jim was lovely, I mean, he said, look, son, he said, you've got to learn to relax. I was getting uptight because I was getting little cuts and little nicks. I was getting uptight. And he said, what I'll do, he said, no one wanted to use me, basically. None of the British promoters wanted to use me because I'd lost 3 fights. So what we had to do is go and establish ourselves somewhere. So we went to Germany. Now, I had 3 fights there. I fought Hans Kabfeller, who was the German heavyweight champ. He was about 6'4" and about 17 stone. And I boxed him in Dortmund, and I give him a boxing lesson for 10 rounds, boxed his ears off. And all the Germans picked me up and said, wunderbar, walk me around this. I thought, yeah, this is good, we'll come back here again. And then they had the old European heavyweight champ, a fellow called Heinz Neuhaus. Neuhaus, who was an old European German champ. He was getting on a bit. Now, I've given him a boxing lesson.
But I heard that you went over there to see this professor who was going to teach you how to relax.
Oh, relax? Yeah, well, it did, yeah. Jim gave this story to the press, yeah. He was about, like, 20, and it was female, but it was very good. No, I'm only joking, but...
No. But what was the turning point? Because you did come back, and there had to be a turning point.
Yeah. Well, the turning point basically was then I'd got confidence in the last two fights out there. I thought Neuhaus had got a draw, knocked a fella out called Eric Schroppner, who was the biggest draw in Germany in them days. They were building him up to fight Archie Moore for the world light heavyweight title, and I knocked him out and they disqualified me. But anyway, I got me confidence back, and then I fought Dick Richardson at Porthcawl down in South Wales, and I knocked him out in 5 rounds. And then after that, the career just went steadily along. Nicely.
And Brian London for the title, for the first
Yeah,
title.
well, I beat Brian 3 times, so I won him outright, but I haven't got him on the mantel shelf, thank God.
But a thrill it must have been to win the British title for the first time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a shame, I think, modern day British heavyweights, they've sort of rubbished the British heavyweight championship. When I was a kid and when I turned pro, I wanted to win a Lonsdale belt. Christ, that was my first. I wanted to win 1 outright, or I went on and won 3 outright, which was marvellous.
What was your schedule in those days? What, 4 or 5 fights a year or less?
No, well, I mean, when I was champion, you couldn't afford to. No, you could see people. I only used to fight twice a year. People used to say, "Why don't you fight more?" I said, "Well, I can go out in the street and get punched on the nose for nothing." I mean, we had a tax system in this country. I mean, every pound, I'm talking about old money now, every pound I earned in them days when I was champion, I was paying 16 and 9 pence, nearly 17 shillings tax. 16, my highest rate of tax, when I fought Ali for the world title the second time, that I was the highest paid British fighter. The previous highest paid British fighter before me was Randolph Turpin. When he fought Sugar Ray Robinson for the world middleweight title, his fight was worth 70,000 quid to him on paper. When I fought Ali the second time for the world title, that was worth 80,000 quid to me. You know how much I saw out of that?
No.
14,000 quid. I was lucky to see 14,000 quid.
And that was after the tax and all your expenses?
Well, all the expenses, the tax. I was lucky to keep 14. I didn't see 14,000 quid of it. No.
I think one of the fights that I remember particularly was against Zora Foley.
Zora
He was
Foley,
number 3 at that point, wasn't he?
Well, he was joint number 1 actually with Eddie Machin for the world title.
How did that happen?
Well, I mean, Jim Wicks, Solomon's, I think it was Solomon, or was it Levine then? I'm not sure. It could have been for Levine. Levine said, no, would we fight him? We said yes. And he was a dangerous fighter, Zora Foley. He was, I mean, he was never the same when he fought Ali, but when I fought him, he was young. He was fighting like to win the title off of, what's his name? Floyd Patterson was champion in them days, but he was a box puncher. He was a great boxer, looked good jabber, and an hell of a right-hand punch. And I can remember he hit me with a right-hand punch in the first fight, and I thought, yeah, keep on my old bite and give him the left hand, which I did. You know, and I boxed his ears off. I thought, all right, the second one I hadn't trained properly, and he beat me, but he was a dangerous fighter.
You mentioned the 2 guys, Solomons, who promoted certainly your first fights, and then Harry Levine. How do you think those 2 guys would have fared against someone like Don King?
Well, I think, they were hard men themselves. They'd have stood their ground with him because they were pretty shrewd men. See, Solomons came onto the scene just after the Second World War when there was a lot of black money going around in them days. He was a good showman. He was the first promoter to dress the ringside, where everyone who sat ringside for the first 6 rows had to come in dinner jackets. Levine was a different character. Levine was an hard man, businessman. You know, you had to argue, to wrangle to get Jim had to argue with him, get every pound out, a shilling out of him. But once you shook hands with him, you done a deal, your money was there. Solomon's was slightly different. See, Solomon's, he would say, yeah, all right, we'll give you that. And then if only like he had a bad house, he'd come to her, he'd cry, oh, Jim, you've got to take less. There was not a full house. Oh, and he was moaning. Totally different characters, but 2 great showmen in the game.
But Jim was up to that, wasn't he?
Oh, Jim, I mean, Jim had been mixed with him. Jim was in bookmaking and boxing all his life. You know, I mean, Jim had made a book on every track in the country. He knew all them guys like William Hill, Jack Swift, Solomons, all ended up like millionaire bookmakers. Jim, years ago, taught them all how to reckon bets and more or less...
Well, I tell you one thing. I remember you coming to the World of Sport studio and we fixed it up with Jim Wicks, and Jim Wicks said... You'll come and I'll come as long as you've got 2 television sets, one on BBC and one on ITV, so I can watch the racing.
Yeah. Oh, well, he had the blower, Jim. He turned from being a bookmaker to a professional punter. I mean, Jim had the blower in his house. What they have in a betting shop, he had it put in his house. so he could get all the latest prices of horses.
Now, you mentioned Floyd Patterson, and you had a fight with him.
Yeah.
That was a sobering experience, wasn't it?
It was. Well, see, what he got. See, people say to me, Ali was the fastest. Well, perhaps he was the fastest moving heavyweight of all time. No heavyweight ever moved as fast as Ali did, or ever likely to in the future. But what I would always put, Floyd Patterson had as fast or faster hands than Ali did. And he was a better one single puncher. See, Ali, basically, because he was moving so fast on the balls of his feet and jumping around, he never got leverage off the ground. So when he hit you, he wasn't like a devastating one knockout punch merchant. All right, he'd hit you with about, he used to hit all them big guys who were a bit slow, who used to look marvellous again. He'd hit them with about 6 or 8 punches, stun them, they didn't know where it was, and the referee had to jump in and stop. But Patterson was a better one punch merchant, and he had a hell of a good left hook, and I'd hurt Patterson to the body once or twice, and I could hear him grunting that. And in the 5th round, he's hit me with a left hook, which was I'd have been proud of a throw, I'd tell you. And unfortunately, I got up, but I was a bit groggy, and the referee had to stop it. But it was a shame.
How would you rate Ali? Would you say that he was the greatest ever?
I always think that's hard. You know, the greatest tribute you can pay to any athlete is to say he was the best of his era, and undoubtedly Ali was. He was the greatest of his era. I would put him in the top 5. You know, I would say Johnson, Dempsey, Louis, Marciano, and Ali. They would be in the 5 in my mind, greatest heavyweights of all time. They'd have serviced whatever era they'd have boxed in. They'd have come to the top because they all had boxing brains. They had some of them were great punchers. Someone like Ali had great mobility and speed and cat-like reflexes. So, you know, yeah, and that's the greatest tribute you can pay to them all.
You didn't ever feel that you'd like to nibble Clay's ear or Ali's ear, did you?
You wouldn't have had. You wouldn't have had long enough chance to bite his bleeding ears. He was always on the move. I mean, when I fought him in '63 and '66, I mean, he didn't stay still in a 3-minute round for 2 seconds. I mean, he was on the move all the time.
But I'm talking really, joking, but I'm talking about Tyson.
Yeah.
I mean, can you believe things like that happening now?
No, well, I can't believe it. I mean, see, if a European fighter had done that, if I'd have done that, I'd have been banned for the rest of my life. We'd have been, if you'd have bit someone's ear off in a British ring, the Border Control would have banned you. And quite rightly, you should be. You should be banned. See, but now, because Tyson basically is managed by Don King. Don King's a very powerful guy in American boxing. He's earning millions of dollars out of Tyson. He's not going to let the Nevada state ban him for life. You just hear you take his revoke his license. That's all they've done is revoked his license for a year. He'll get his license back in
He'll box again, do you think?
Oh, of course he will. Yeah. Don King won't allow them to ban him for the rest of his life.
I tell you what it reminds me, because you were in line for a world title fight against, well, certainly a world title eliminator, I think, against Jimmy Ellis. And
that was going to be billed as a world title
was it a world title fight?
Yeah. See, because if you remember, Ali was I'm not sure, WBC, and Ellis was WBA champion, and that was the first time, and the Border Control wouldn't allow. That's why I gave up my British title as a token of, because the Border Control in them days was taking 10% of my money, top of the bill, literally for doing nothing. And yet when I had a chance to fight for a world title, and Levine wanted to bill it as a world title fight, he didn't want it billed as a final eliminator. He wanted it billed as a world title fight, and the board wouldn't give him permission. So he called the fight off, and that's why we handed back the British heavyweight title. In them days, I mean, when I was boxing, if you got the opportunity to fight for a world title, you had that once in your life. Now, I mean, you can fight for this one, you don't win that, you fight for another one. If you don't win that, you can fight for another one. You get 4 chances. I'd have been a double world champion if I'd have had 4 chances.
You would. But you did win the British title back again, and of course it was another of your many fights against Joe Erskine, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, dear old Joe, see, he was a great... You mentioned in a little bit before that we had 5 fights. We had 8 fights as an amateur and a pro, and I came out winning 5-3 out of the 8 fights. Now, Joe Erskine, if he could have punched, he'd have been a world champion. He'd have been a world champion. He was the best. There was a light heavyweight, which Angelo Dunn had, who was... they all thought he was the best thing on 2 legs, a man called Willie Pastrana.
Oh,
now, Willie Pastrana, I sparred with him. I'd done, 50, 60, 70, 80 rounds sparring with him when he first came to London. And then they made a match with Pastrano and Joe Erskine. and the press came to me and said, look, they've made it, who's going to win? I said, who's going to win? I said, bleeding Erskine the box his ear. I said, he won't see which way. They said, you mean it? I said, of course I believe me. I said, Erskine knows more about boxing than his little finger. Well, when they matched them, here, Pastrana didn't see which way Erskine went. I mean, God, he boxed it, and they all thought Pastrana was the best thing on two legs.
Actually, you're quite good mates, weren't you? Because he had all these fights.
Oh, bloody well.
But once in the ring, of course, naturally.
Well, we were in the army together. He was in the same battalion as me. They shifted him after a while because we were both light heavyweights, so we couldn't have light two, so they shifted him. But no, Joe, he was a lovely character. He died just a few years ago with a big C, bless his heart. But he used to give me more problems and all. I fought London 3 times, beat him. I knocked Joe, Dick Richardson out twice. Beat Billy Walker, beat this one, beat that one. Joe used to give me more bleeding trouble. He had a poker face. You could hit him with your Sunday punch. And whenever I hit him with my left hook, I used to see a bit of pain or blank look. Joe used to just roll his head, and you just for a split second you think, wait a minute, have I hurt him? And just that split second was enough for him to recover. Oh, I wouldn't have liked to play poker with him. He had the deadpan face. Oh, good boxer.
How did you prepare for the fights? How long did you give yourself in that final training?
Well, I always went away. I had most of my bad performances when I lost fights, which were a bit unexpected when I lost them, was when I didn't go away from home to train, or I was trying to put on weight. People kept saying to me, you're too light, put some weight on. Now, if I ever came in a fight, you look at all the bad performances when I boxed bad, I bet I was always 13-11. Now, this day and age, people might think 13-11. For that was heavy for me. I was always 13-6, 13-7.5. Just that extra 3 or 4 pound made all the difference to me. I couldn't, I was like an old cabals.
In fact, did you, not at certain times in weigh-ins, you had to take something with you, didn't you?
Yeah, well, see, Jim Wicks was lovely. Jim was always thinking, and he and whenever I used to fight big guys, I mean, I never minded fighting big guys because usually, I mean, Ali was the exception to the rule, but I used to love. I mean, I fought Jefferson Davies, who was 6'4", he was 16.5 stone, a big American cowboy, big Texan, had big Stetson on, and you know, I used to love them guys because you could be in and out. And but Jim was always thinking. He used to think, now, I can't get on the scales and come in like what I would have. I'd have been like 13 stone 2 or something like that. And he used to think they might give him a psychological boost if I came out and they were like 1.5 stone. So what Jim used to do, he used to get lead. He used to cut lead soles out, and heavyweights, and they could get on the scales in their boots. He used to put these lead soles in, so I'd get, and he had a small weight like that, which used to weigh about 5 pounds. And I used to have it in my hand, no one could see it. And I was still only 13 stone 7.5.
So in other words, you're actually 12-11.
Yeah.
Could you not put weight on?
I couldn't put weight. Oh no, not how I trained. So, I mean, I don't know how fighters train now. See, I never did a lot of weightlifting. I never bulked up. I couldn't do that. That did me no good bulking up. So, and if I trained in the summer, I mean, my natural weight was 14 stone. The first 2 or 3 days in the gym, I'd be down to 13.7, and then I had to train another 3 weeks for that. I had to say, so, I mean, at times I was down to about 12 stone 6 because I used to lose so much weight, you know, and I couldn't put on weight.
Where did the phrase Henry Zammer come from, and who started that? Can you remember?
I've got to think it was Desmond Hackett in the what's the name, the old Daily Express.
Yeah.
He nicknamed my punt Henry Zammer.
Someone actually measured the speed of that punch at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, well, we got the Farnborough aeronautical people to come to the gym, and they had this special camera that took 6,000 frames a second. It went like that, you know, and they take this ball up and bag up, and then they come out with all these statistics. It was 3 times faster than a Saturn rocket. It was 3 times faster than the Saturn rocket. Over 7 inches, my left hook landed with 4.5 tons impact. 4.5 tons impact. I said, here, wait a minute, I should have knocked them all out.
Was training something you enjoyed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially as I got older, I enjoyed it more. And a lot of people think that's funny, but I enjoyed it because I could do I could do a routine in the gym, which a lot of young fighters couldn't do. I mean, I used to dance. I used to do a Russian dance as good as any Russian. I mean, I could go bum, 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 all that. I could go all around the gym, kicking me legs out, like all what you see these famous Russian dancers.
Ukrainian dancers, yeah.
And then, as I got older, doing it, I'd done me cartilage, so I couldn't do that after. And this was like in later in my life, in my boxing career, and when that went, then my arm problems, I knew it was time to call it a day.
We've talked. You've mentioned her name, lovely Albina, your delightful wife.
Yeah, bless her.
She put up with it, didn't she? She didn't really like you boxing.
Oh, she hated boxing. I mean, my wife, she only ever come to one fight, and that was on my insistence, and this was when I fought Ali for the world title in '66. She hated every moment. She sat there, she had a programme just in front of her face, never looked at it. And even when I came home and I'd won, she couldn't watch it the next day on television. She'd never watch it on the next day television.
Did she ever try and talk you out of it?
No, she was as good as gold, bless her heart. No, she always, and that's why, you know, in '71, the last fight with Bugden, when I said to her 2 weeks before, this is going to be the last, I had to be true to my word, and that was it. And people often said to me, oh, why didn't you make a comeback and you could have beaten this and that and had a reader? I said, no, I've got to be fair to my wife, because she'd never badgered me. She'd always left it. She knew that I had a good manager in gym. I was sensible myself, and when the right time came to call it a day, we called it a day, which we did.
How did you meet her? I mean, she's an Italian, lovely lady.
She's Italian. She comes from a little village in northern Italy, about 2 hours from Milan. She comes from a little place called Bucacci, where you couldn't even see it on the map. And it was like, it's a little village, it still is a little village with about 6 houses, not on top of a mountain, on top of a hill.
Well, you didn't meet her there.
No, we didn't meet her there. We met her in Fresh Street, not Fresh Street, in Gerrard Street, which was aunt and uncle had about one of the, well, it's the oldest Italian, it was the oldest Italian family-run restaurant called Peter Marrow's in them days. But all the showbiz, all the boxing people used to use it, and Jim Wicks used to eat in there, and he'd naturally, when we turned pro, he took Brother George and myself in there, and we noticed this little Italian wench. She was a good-looking girl there. She still is good-looking, but
she really
she was
is.
A little dolly then, and I started chatting her up, and we got, you know, I knew her for 5 or 6 years before I invited her out, yeah.
Were you a rich man when you finished boxing?
Not rich compared, but I mean, I was one of the highest paid British boxers, as I said. So I mean, you know, I did well. I did well out of it. Let's be honest. I mean, and Jim Wicks was always one to like instill in us that boxing's only for a certain amount of years of your life. When you retire, you're still a young man. So you got to put money away and think and pay your tax and think of the future, which we did. Unfortunately, I was a Lloyd's underwriter. I mean, I was a name in Lloyd's, and we lost a bit over that, but I'm out of that now, thank God. And
well, I mean, just mention that because you'd actually prepared for your retirement, hadn't you, in that kind of way by going into Lloyd's?
Yes. Well, see, I mean, if you look when I joined, I'm talking about, what, 25 years ago when I first became a name in Lloyd's, I was, for an ordinary working class lad, to be invited to become a member. And because you had to be invited, there was plenty of people with plenty of money who couldn't get in them days. And Charles St George, who was a good friend of mine, who used to do he used to insure all the big boxing shows for Levine in them days. I got to know him very well. He was a personal friend of mine. And he asked me, would I like to become a name under his syndicates in Lloyd's, which I did, yeah.
And of course, initially it was marvellous.
And for a few years, I mean, we had good years. I mean, all right, in them days, there wasn't fortunes you could earn, but I mean, it was good. I was getting a nice check at the end of the year for about 3 years, then suddenly...
That hit you hard, it must have done.
Oh, yeah. Well, the big tragedy was, unfortunately, see, the only way I could get a lump of money quick without perhaps ending myself up in debt and, like, you know, and paying back was to sell my Lonsdale belts. I had to sell the 3 Lonsdale belts, which was a shame, really.
That really must have hit you
that was a choker for me.
Yeah, it would have been.
Because, you know, but it was a choker. But, all right, I got a lump of money. They brought auction. I think we done wrong. We went down to Kent and auctioned them instead of keeping them in London, and we would have got a lot more money in London than we did in Kent. But you can only be advised by the auction people, and we didn't get as much as we thought. But I mean, we did it, and I know.
And you're free of it all now, anyway.
Oh yeah, I'm out of it now. Thank God, with equity coming in, we've got out of it.
Has it surprised you that when you finished boxing, that you you were even more loved by the British public than when you were in the ring. I mean, they had such an affection for you. Always have, and you still have. Whenever I go out with you now, they make such an enormous fuss of you. I mean, you've got a very special place in the hearts of this nation.
Well, it's true what you say, Dick, and I've never tried to analyse it, and I don't want to, because, you know, you think, please God, it carries on, because wherever you go, people want to say hello, they want to shake your hand, they want your autograph, and when people do that, they're paying you a compliment. And that's the only way you can look at it. And when I see young athletes and young whoever, sometimes you see kids come up to them, they just go, they poo-ah them away, I'll go away, I can't. I think, oh, you don't know what you're doing, son. You don't know. They're the ones who are going to pay your wages all for the rest of your life and things, you know.
I talked about my sharpest memory, and that was, of course, the first fight with Clay. What are your happiest memories looking back on your career?
Well, I think, you know, when you've had such a long career like I have, I think basically what I'm so happy about is that I fought a lot of good fighters. I beat a lot of them, so, you know, you've got a pretty good record there. I'm the only man who's ever won 3 Lonsdale belts outright. Well, no one can do that because they've changed the rules now, because it was costing the Border Control so much money. So they had to change the rules. But I'm the only one at any weight who ever did in previous years. I had a good career. I've got a lovely wife. I've got 2 great sons. They're both married. I'm a grandfather. I've got a lovely kid. The youngest one is married to Sean. They're not family-minded, I don't think. But anyway, they're all happily married. I've got good health. I'm playing golf, and I'm playing decent golf.
I know. I played with you and against you.
So
one fight we had, one scrap we haven't talked about, was the one you had with Edith Summerskill, who was a member of Parliament and, in fact, a member of the House of Lords at one point, wasn't she?
The good old doctor, yeah. Well, she sat in the House of Commons for about 30 years. In the last 10 years, she sat in the House of Lords. And they asked me, would I appear on Granada TV with her?
You better tell everybody why you had these scraps with her, because she kept on... She was... trying to get rid of boxing, wasn't she?
Well, she was very anti-boxing, wasn't she? I mean, whenever she was out in the public eye, she used to bring this subject about boxing being banned, should be banned, and she used to get a bit of publicity. And they asked me to go up to Granada, so I go up in Leeds, and I'm thinking, now I better play a bit careful, because debating's her strong suit. And I'd seen her about a week or 2 previous with Solomons, and Solomons had got a bit aggressive with her, and she tied him up and made him look about that small. So I thought I'll be all sweetness and lightness to her, you know. So when I get there, I'm sitting next to her, and the prayer had been going on for 5 or 10 minutes, and she'd been smiling at me, and I've been smiling back at her, and I'm thinking, let me pay me cards, all right, I'll take her home tonight, you know. And then suddenly she came out with a voice, which I imagine she woke him up in the House of Lords with. She said, Mr. Cooper, have you got up recently and seen the state of your nose? And I thought, well, what a cheeky... I mean, you don't like being rude to a lady. So I thought, well, I've got to come back at you, love. So I said, madam, I said, have you got up recently, looked in the mirror and seen the state of your nose? I said, blimey, boxing was my excuse. What's yours? Everyone erupted they all erupted in the studio. I thought, oh, God.
But what do you say to the people that are anti-boxing now? I mean, how do you defend the sport?
Well, I must say it's getting harder to defend it. See, when you get someone like Tyson who bites another boxer's ear off, how can you defend? See, there's no defence there. See, and what I think, I say, fancy a guy like Tyson. I mean, you're making bullets for the anti-boxing people to fire at you when you do things like that. So it is hard to explain it when you get things like that. But I still think boxing, when it's controlled properly, and I still think British boxing is the best run and best controlled boxing there is in the world. We look after our fighters in this country. Our fighters are examined twice. You have to have a brain scan. But I mean, it'd be a terrible outlook on life because there's danger connected with certain things. The easy option is that if anything dangerous, say ban it. That means, you know, that's crazy. The human being, man, is what motivates man to carry on and do things in life. Exploration to the moon or across the world. Can you imagine years ago if they'd have said, oh, it's dangerous, when they thought the world was flat, you went over the edge and you well, someone said, no, we'll take a chance. It's not, you know, it's round, and we found out. I mean, no, because there's danger, don't want to ban everything. Let's take precautions. If boxers need to be examined 3 times a year, examine them 3 times a year. But don't ban it, because if you're talking about banning dangerous sports, you've got to ban, before you ban boxing, you've got to ban horse riding and all. There's more deaths from horse riding and people with broken necks and laying like cripples with horse riding. You've got to ban rugby. Now, the whole thing they come out and say, but boxing boxing is one man goes out. I see a woman. You see modern day rugby. You mean to tell me when that guy's going there, he's not meaning to do damage? When that fast bowler bowls a beamer, he's not trying to get the guy out. He's trying to hit the guy. And that, I mean, that's all. And more people die playing cricket than ever do people die playing boxing.
So you're convinced that boxing should have a place in the next century?
I think it should, but I don't think it will.
Why?
I don't think. Well, boxing's killing itself. Boxing's killing itself. They're putting. See, when you get boxing putting too many one-sided fights on, so you can't con the public. If you can con them once, you'll con them twice, but you can't keep doing it, and that's what they're doing. So you can't get fighters, you know, whoever they are. I won't name them, but you can't put good fighters in with, you know, second raters. So the guys are going there and knocking them over in a round and a half. If you're paying now on big fights now, 150, 200 quid for ringside seats, and you go in there, the kid gets in the ring, and it's all over in a minute and a half, a round and a half. You're cheating the public, and that's what they're doing. I mean, they're cheating the public now. If you can't put a good opponent in, don't make the match, don't make a fight. No. But that's what they're doing. They're putting second-rate fighters in. They're just putting fodder, as I say, dead bodies for good fighters to knock over, and that's killing the game.
What do you think of the current heavyweights? I mean,
Lennox
17 stone heavyweights.
Well, they're all battleships now. No, they're all big battleships. Yes. I mean, it's totally different from when I was boxing. Now, I mean, they keep saying if you're 15 stone, you're not big enough. I think that's a load of nonsense. If you're big enough, if you're good enough, you're big enough. I mean, you only got to look at Evander Holyfield. He's not 6'4" and 17, 18 stone.
In fact, he was a cruiserweight to start off.
He was a cruiserweight. He's fit. Look at Tyson in his prime, 15 stone. They're all big enough. If you're good enough, you're big enough. No. See, what they do, they all bulk up now. Now, I think the best moving heavyweight in the world today is Lennox Lewis. But he's not when he comes in at 17 stone 12 and 17 stone 13, which he comes in at. When he comes in 17 stone, just under 16-10, he's the best moving heavyweight in the world today. Why they want to bulk up? You wouldn't walk around with two great big shopping bags all day. You'd be knackered, wouldn't you? And that's all you do if you're putting a stone on. That's all you're doing. Excess weight, bulk up.
And that excess weight is not adding anything to the punch, is it?
Of course it's not. No. If you're 15 stone in my mind is the ideal weight for an heavyweight. You've got weight for punch, and you can have mobility. Look at Ali in his prime. When I boxed him in, I say, 63, 14 stone 11, moving like a middleweight. When I boxed him the second time in 66, he was 15 stone 4, moving like a middleweight. You don't want more weight than that.
Henry, on reflection, what was the most amusing thing that might have happened in your career as a boxer?
Oh dear, that's always a
hard one, isn't it?
That's always a hard one to. Well, you've seen some funny things. I mean, over the years. I mean, we had an amateur years ago when I was boxing. He had like a mop of red hair, and he used to come in and he'd all be gloved up, and they'd take you to, and the last thing they used to do is the bell went dong, his trannies go whoop, and it was a wig. He had alopecia as a kid, and he had pulled this wig, and the kid used to go, and while he like boss, he had more first round victories.
Well, talking of wigs, what about Floyd Patterson?
Oh yeah, well, Floyd. I mean, see, when Liston beat him the first time, that affected him, I think, meant he could never come to terms that Liston had beaten him in the first round. And he used to pack into his gear after that. He used to put in his gear up on a big fight night. When I used to go for my feet out. I used to put my boots, my socks, my jock strap, my protector, my shorts, my dressing gown, my towel, my gum shield, Vaseline, this, that, and that. That was all I wanted. Two other things in. I never knew any fight. He used to put dark glasses and a false beard, and he used to say to the promoter, "Where's the nearest exit I can get out where no one?" So that say, "Well, the nearest one there." And if he lost, he used to think it was a deal. He used to put dark glass on the beard and sneak out of a back entrance. That's strange to have that mentality, you know, because he was a great fighter. I say he had the fast. Cus D'Amato, his manager, used to just shout a series of numbers in the ring: 8, 2, 4, 16, 24. They were all certain punches. Boom, boom. He'd put them all into a cluster of punches. You know, brilliant. I mean, he had just as fast as hands as Ali.
Of course, Customato found Tyson too, didn't he?
Tyson, oh yes, yeah. Jose Torres, the light heavyweight champion. That's the one I was trying to think before. Jose Torres, he was a light heavyweight.
But I mean, when I saw the first one, I was ringside when he beat Trevor Berbick in Las Vegas, and at that point, Tyson was an incredible puncher, an incredible hand speed and all the things. I mean, he didn't look anywhere near 5'11". He was about 5'9", 5'9 and a half. But at that time, he was a real menace.
See, whether he'll ever get back to it, I don't think, because see, if you watched him in his prime before he went to prison, when he was in his prime, them 3 years in prison, I think, have slowed him up. He was fast, but he had movement from the waist. He was moving this way. Now he's still fast hand speed, but he's walking straight. He walks straight into punch. He's not moving from the hips and missing punches. What he does, he walks now and perhaps catches them walking onto what a lot of fighters are doing now. They're forgetting their boxing now. As I say, it's not boxing now, it's fighting. All fighting, you watch trainers in corner, go forward, come forward, come forward. They think there's only one way of fighting now. Boxing is going forward, and they're fighting, and that's why you're having more accidents in boxing now, because kids are walking onto punches. They're walking on punch, making them twice as hard. They're forgetting how to sway with them, take the sting out, slip them, block them. They're just stopping them with their faces.
You've had a fantastic life and a boxing career as well. Is there anything you would have changed looking back on it?
Not really, no. All the major decisions I made, I'm quite happy with. I mean, I'll have to change some of the verdicts. But no, all the major decisions I took with dear old Jim Bless. And the best thing, as I say, I can't emphasise that with Jim. He was like a second father. The best thing I ever did was to sign up with him, because he was a man who all his boxers, he always put his boxers first. Money never came into it. I mean, they could have offered Jim, when I was a kid, like when I was first started, they could have offered him, like in them days, 5,000 quid, which would have been fortunes to fight. And if he didn't think I was ready for it, he'd have turned it down. Half the managers, give me the 5 grand, they wouldn't care if the kid got in and got knocked up in the air or whatever. No, that was the best thing I ever did with Jim Bless's heart,
Was perhaps the one regret that you never won a world title?
Yeah, well, that's the only thing, because to be honest, I did everything else. I mean, I was British, European, Commonwealth, or Empire in them days, and it turned to Commonwealth. I mean, I boxed a lot of good fighters, and yeah, the thing was, it would have been marvellous if I could have won a world title, but it was never to be. So I mean, I've no regrets. I mean, I would do it all again. In that era, I mean, today perhaps might be done. I might want to be a golfer now.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, what lies ahead for Henry Cooper? You're still as busy as ever.
Yeah, well,
as much in demand as ever.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, as long as I can see, I keep busy. I meet the public. You're going around meeting the public. I'm doing different things basically every day. I never get bored. It's not boring enough. I mean, last night I was opening a club for young people, sports club. I'm up in Birmingham tomorrow doing after dinner thing tomorrow. It's great, you know. I mean, and I can play golf, and I'm playing with golf. Marvellous. Play golf at the London Club.
Playing so well, aren't you?
Brilliantly, yeah.
You're a member of the London Club, aren't you?
The London Club is a beautiful club, and it's Nagahara, Mr. Nagahara, who's a Japanese guy who owns the club. He's gave me honorary membership there, which was marvellous. I mean, as long as I can be there, I can go up there a couple of times a week and play. I can play in the old pro-ams and celeb-ams, earn a lot of money for Variety Club, which we do, for Sunshine Coaches, for you know, underprivileged kids. I mean, and that's another thing, you know, when you've had kids of your own and they're well, you think, by the grace of God, perhaps when you see these poor little kids come up to get their new coaches, you know, I mean, all severely handicapped. I've been lucky in life. I mean, I'd do it all again. Wouldn't change a thing. Marvellous. Yeah.
You've been marvellous. Thanks very much indeed, Henry.
Well, thank you, Dick.